Your body is asking for something it isn't getting, and it has been asking for a long time. If you have Sjogren's, or you suspect you might, you already know the feeling of standing at the kitchen sink, hands in the water, and realizing you don't have enough left in you to finish the dishes. That's not laziness. That's not getting older. Something at the cellular level may be running out of power, and in the next few minutes, we're going to walk through what the research actually shows about why that happens, what it means for your joints, your nerves, your lungs, and your daily independence, and what you can document and ask about at your next appointment. This isn't a diagnosis, and it isn't medical advice. It's a way to recognize a pattern your body may already be showing you, so you can bring the right questions into the room with your doctor. Stay with me, because around the middle of this video, we are going to look at a study that connects your fatigue directly to what's happening inside your cell's power plants, something almost no one is talking about yet. Most people are told that Sjogren's means dry eyes and a dry mouth. That's true, but it's only the visible edge of it. Around 90% of people with Sjogren's do have that dryness by the time they're diagnosed. What gets missed is that up to half of people with this disease also develop symptoms outside the glands entirely, in the joints, the skin, the lungs, the nerves, sometimes the kidneys. Dryness is the part you can see in the mirror. The part underneath, the part driving your fatigue and your aches, is much easier for both you and your doctor to miss, because it doesn't show up when someone looks at your eyes or your tongue. That's the first shift we need to make. Stop thinking of Sjogren's as a dryness problem with some tiredness attached, and start thinking of it as a whole-body immune condition where dryness happens to be the most visible symptom, not the only one. There's a specific kind of exhaustion worth naming here, because it's different from being sleepy. You can sleep 8, even 9 hours, and still wake up feeling like you never lay down. You get through your morning coffee and by mid-afternoon your body feels like it's moving through water. This isn't the tiredness that comes from a late night or a stressful week, the kind a weekend fixes. It's there on good days and bad days alike, showing up regardless of how well you slept, how much you rested over the weekend, or how carefully you paced yourself the day before. That disconnect, between how much rest you're getting and how little it seems to help, is itself a clue, and it's one of the clearest signs that something other than ordinary sleep deprivation is driving what you're feeling. Here's a scene a lot of you will recognize. You're in a meeting, or talking with your kids, and a word you use all the time just isn't there. You know exactly what you mean. You can almost see the shape of it. It just won't come. Or you walk into a room and forget why you went in, not once in a while, the way everyone does, but often enough that it scares you a little. This is sometimes called brain fog, and it's a real, documented feature of Sjogren's for a meaningful number of patients, not a sign that you're losing it. The pattern matters more than any single moment. One forgotten word means nothing. Fog that gets worse after a hard day, after heat, after poor sleep, and that clears somewhat with rest, that's a pattern worth writing down. Track when it happens and what came before it. That single habit, more than any single test, is often what helps a doctor connect the dots. There's another version of this same story that shows up in the joints and the skin instead of the brain. Maybe it's your fingers struggling to open a jar you've opened 1,000 times before. Maybe it's your knees aching just enough that you start choosing the elevator over the stairs, not because you decided to, but because your body quietly made that decision for you. Joint pain in Sjogren's often moves. It's in your wrist this week, your knees the next, and it's frequently mistaken for early arthritis or simply written off as getting older. Skin can join in too, showing up as unusual dryness that lotion doesn't fix, or patches of redness that come and go without explanation. None of these symptoms, on their own, would raise a flag. Together, layered on top of the fatigue and the fog, they start to look less like a collection of separate complaints and more like one body sending the same signal through different channels. Part of why this is so easy to miss is that each of these symptoms, described alone, sounds ordinary. Tired sounds ordinary. Achy joints sound ordinary. Forgetting a word once in a while sounds ordinary. Dry eyes sound ordinary. It's only when you say all 4 of those things in the same sentence, to the same doctor, in the same appointment, that a different picture starts to form, and most appointments simply aren't structured to let that happen, because most appointments are built around one complaint at a time. That's not a criticism of any individual doctor. It's a structural gap you can close yourself, simply by bringing a written list instead of trying to remember, under time pressure, which symptom to lead with. If what you've just heard sounds like your own life, and you've been told for years that your labs look fine, type the words not imagined in the comments right now. Because what we're about to explain is the part of this story that finally gives that experience a mechanism, not just a mood. Here is the center of everything we've been building toward. To understand it, it helps to back up one step and look at what's driving all of this in the first place. In Sjogren's, the immune system, which is supposed to protect you from infection, mistakenly treats your own tissue as a threat. This produces ongoing, low-level inflammation throughout the body, elevated levels of inflammatory proteins circulating in the blood, immune cells gathering in places they shouldn't, like the salivary and tear glands. That chronic background inflammation is expensive, biologically speaking. It uses resources. It creates oxidative stress, a kind of cellular wear and tear caused by unstable molecules called free radicals. And it turns out that ongoing stress on the immune system doesn't stay contained to the glands it's most famous for attacking. It reaches all the way down to the machinery inside individual cells that produces energy. In the last year, researchers at the Oklahoma Medical Research Foundation ran a study that looked directly inside the cells of people with Sjogren's, specifically their T cells, a key part of the immune system. In a healthy body, your cell's mitochondria, think of them as the power plants inside every cell, turning fuel into usable energy, wear out over time and get recycled through a cleanup process called mitophagy. Old, damaged mitochondria get broken down, and new ones take their place. In this study, that recycling process looked disrupted in people with Sjogren's. Damaged mitochondria weren't being cleared out the way they should be. They lingered, produced more oxidative stress, and the researchers measured lower oxygen consumption in these cells, a direct sign of reduced energy output. And critically, the degree of that disruption tracked with how severe a person's fatigue actually was. This is early research. It was done in a relatively small group of patients, and it hasn't yet been confirmed across the full range of people living with Sjogren's. But it's the first study to draw a direct line between what's happening inside your cells and the bone-deep exhaustion so many of you have described for years to doctors who had no explanation to offer. This is not ordinary tiredness. Ordinary tiredness gets better with a good night's sleep. This kind often doesn't, because the problem isn't how much rest you're getting. It may be how efficiently your cells are able to use the fuel they already have. Think about what that actually costs you across a normal week. A shower, something most people never think twice about, can use up the only real burst of energy you have before noon, which means the rest of the day gets planned around having already spent it. Cooking a full meal for your family might get replaced by something simple out of necessity, not preference. Plans with friends get cancelled, not because you don't want to go, but because you can already feel, hours in advance, that you won't have enough left by evening. None of that is a character flaw or a motivation problem. If your cells are producing less usable energy at the source, then every single thing your body does that day is operating on a smaller budget, and your brain is making real-time decisions about which activities that budget can afford. That's the daily life translation of a laboratory finding about oxygen consumption in T cells. It isn't abstract, it's the difference between a full day and a half day, over and over. It's worth being precise about what this research does and doesn't establish, because overstating it would do you a disservice. This was a case control study, meaning it compared a group of Sjogren's patients to healthy volunteers, and the group of Sjogren's patients studied was relatively small. It hasn't yet been repeated in a larger, more diverse population, and it doesn't yet tell us whether treating the mitochondrial dysfunction directly would improve fatigue, or whether this pattern applies equally to everyone with this disease. What it does establish, convincingly, is that there is a measurable, cellular-level abnormality that lines up with how tired people say they feel, which matters enormously if you've spent years being told that nothing is technically wrong with you. That same underlying immune activity doesn't stay contained to your energy systems. It can reach your nerves. If you've ever felt a burning or tingling sensation in your feet at night, bad enough that you can't stand the weight of a bedsheet on your skin, or you've stood up too fast and felt the room tilt, your heart suddenly pounding, that's not automatically anxiety, and it's not automatically just poor circulation. Sjogren's is associated with damage to small, thin nerve fibers that carry pain, temperature, and automatic body functions like heart rate and digestion. Here's the detail almost nobody explains clearly. A standard nerve conduction test, the kind most doctors order first, often comes back completely normal in people with this type of nerve damage, because that test is built to detect large nerve fiber problems, not small fiber ones. In one body of research, Close to 40% of Sjogren's patients with clear neuropathic pain had a normal standard nerve test, yet when a small skin biopsy was done instead, small fiber damage was confirmed in the overwhelming majority of that same group. A normal nerve test doesn't mean normal nerves. It means the test that was run wasn't built to see this particular kind of damage. If this sounds like you, note whether the burning is worse at night, whether it's symmetric on both feet or both hands, and whether standing up quickly brings on dizziness or a racing heart. That pattern, written down over a few weeks, is often more useful to a specialist than a single description given in an 8-minute appointment. The same nerve fibers that carry pain and temperature signals also help regulate things you never consciously think about: digestion, sweating, how your blood vessels adjust when you change position. When those fibers are affected, the symptoms can look completely unrelated to a nerve problem at first glance. Feeling full after eating only a few bites, unpredictable digestion, sweating too much or too little, skin that turns unusually pale or blotchy, these get attributed to diet, to stress, to getting older, when they may actually be part of the same autonomic nervous system pattern as the burning feet and the dizziness on standing. This is exactly the kind of connection that's easy for any single doctor to miss, because a gastroenterologist treats the stomach, a cardiologist treats the heart rate, and a podiatrist treats the feet, and none of them may ever compare notes. You're often the only person in the room who has the full picture, which is precisely why writing it all down in one place, in your own words, matters as much as any test. For some people, this kind of nerve involvement changes what a normal day can hold. Driving at night becomes harder when your feet don't reliably tell you where the pedals are. Walking through a grocery store on legs that feel like they're wrapped in cotton will change how far you're willing to go without a place to sit. Standing to cook dinner, something automatic for most people, becomes something you plan around, timing it for whenever the dizziness is least likely to hit. These are not minor inconveniences. They are your independence, taken from you one small task at a time, and they deserve to be named as exactly that. Now here's where a lot of you have probably lived for years without a name for it. You've been told it's fibromyalgia, or perimenopause, or, worse, that it's stress, or anxiety, or depression, and that if you just managed your mental health better, the fatigue and the pain would ease up. Here's what the research actually shows about that overlap, and it goes in both directions. Somewhere between roughly 30 and just under 50% of people with Sjogren's also meet the diagnostic criteria for fibromyalgia. That's a real overlap, not a coincidence. But it runs the other way too. People who are diagnosed with fibromyalgia first have been shown, in large population studies, to have roughly double to triple the risk of later being diagnosed with Sjogren's, and that risk is highest in women between 20 and 49. Overlap is not the same as identical. Two conditions can share a stage, the same fatigue, the same widespread pain, the same brain fog, without sharing the same underlying script. That's exactly why a general fibromyalgia diagnosis, on its own, shouldn't be the final word if you also have dryness, nerve symptoms, or unexplained joint pain. It may be worth asking specifically whether antibody testing for SSA, sometimes called Rho, and SSB, sometimes called La, along with a basic evaluation of tear and saliva production, has ever been part of your workup. Those are specific, targeted tests that a general checkup often doesn't include on its own. It also helps to understand what a normal result actually tells you and what it doesn't. A negative ANA, or antinuclear antibody test, is often treated as if it closes the door on any autoimmune possibility, but a meaningful number of people with Sjogren's have a negative ANA, especially early in the disease, and a positive result on its own doesn't confirm the diagnosis either. A Schummer test, which measures how much moisture your eyes produce, can be mildly abnormal for many reasons besides Sjogren's, including simple aging. No single test is the whole story. The combination, symptoms, specific antibodies, objective gland measurements, and sometimes a small salivary gland biopsy, is what a rheumatologist actually weighs together. A normal result on one piece of that puzzle can be reassuring, but it cannot, on its own, explain away everything else you're feeling. Let me walk you through what this looks like in a real pattern, using a composite scenario built from common, documented experiences rather than one specific person. A woman in her 50s starts with what seems like ordinary fatigue and joint aches. Her doctor checks basic blood work, everything comes back within normal range, and she's told it's probably stress, maybe early menopause. Over the next 2 years, Dryness in her eyes gets bad enough that she starts carrying eye drops everywhere. Her feet start burning at night. She brings all of this up, a little at a time, at different appointments, and each symptom gets addressed on its own. Dry eyes get artificial tears, the burning feet get chalked up to poor circulation, the fatigue gets labeled as likely depression. It isn't until a rheumatologist finally orders a specific antibody panel that the pieces come together into one diagnosis. She wasn't imagining any of it. She was missing the one piece of information, that these symptoms belonged in the same conversation, because no single doctor had all of them laid out together the way you're seeing them right now. This kind of scenario shows up in slightly different forms across many patients' experiences, not as one person's story but as a recurring shape. Sometimes it starts with the eyes, a persistent grittiness that eye drops only partly relieve. Sometimes it starts with exhaustion so heavy that a full night's sleep feels like it barely made a dent. Sometimes it's the joints first, aching in a way that migrates from week to week. What tends to be consistent, across composite cases built from documented patterns like this one, is the sequence. Individual symptoms addressed one at a time, each treated as its own small problem, until enough of them accumulate that someone, sometimes the patient herself, sometimes a new doctor seeing the whole chart for the first time, finally asks whether one underlying condition could explain all of it at once. That kind of delay is not unusual, and it's measurable. A large population study out of Taiwan, tracking patients through national health records, found that the typical gap between the first appearance of dryness symptoms and an actual Sjogren's diagnosis was close to 2 years. 2 years of appointments, of being told things look fine, of wondering if you're the problem. That number exists because symptoms show up gradually and often don't get connected across different specialists. It's not because patients weren't paying attention. It's because the system wasn't built to connect a rheumatologic pattern that shows up piece by piece in an eye doctor's office, a dentist's chair, and a primary care visit months apart. If you recognize yourself in that 2-year gap, or in something even longer, it's worth sitting with this for a moment. That delay was never a reflection of how clearly you described your symptoms, or how hard you advocated for yourself. It reflects how symptoms like these move through a fragmented healthcare system, one specialist at a time, with no single person required to see the whole picture unless someone insists on it. Knowing that doesn't undo the years already spent. But it does mean the next conversation you have with a doctor doesn't have to start from zero. It can start from the pattern you've now heard laid out clearly, in one place, for the first time. Now let's talk honestly about the more serious end of this, because avoiding it would be its own kind of dishonesty, and burying it without context would be irresponsible. Some people with Sjogren's develop involvement in the lungs. Research puts this at roughly 10 to 20% of patients, most commonly showing up as a persistent dry cough or shortness of breath, that doesn't have an obvious cause like a cold or allergies. Severe involvement of multiple organs beyond the glands happens in a smaller group, around 15% by some estimates. And there is a real, measurable increase in lymphoma risk associated with Sjogren's. Recent research puts the relative risk several times higher than the general population. That number sounds frightening on its own, and it should get your attention, but it needs its proper context to be useful instead of just scary. Relative risk being several times higher does not mean high absolute risk. The actual number of people with Sjogren's who go on to develop lymphoma remains a small fraction of the whole group, and known risk factors, like persistent swelling of the salivary glands, specific antibody patterns, or low complement levels on blood work, help doctors know who might benefit from closer monitoring. This is not a reason to panic about a symptom you've had for years. It is a reason to mention any new, persistent swelling near the jaw or neck, or a cough that doesn't resolve, at your next routine visit, so it becomes part of your ongoing record rather than something you quietly wait out. It's also worth saying plainly what this doesn't mean. It doesn't mean every person with Sjogren's is on a path toward lung disease or lymphoma. Most people with this condition live with fatigue, dryness, and some combination of the symptoms we've already covered, and never develop these more serious complications at all. The research exists so that the small number of people who do carry additional risk factors, persistent gland swelling, certain antibody patterns, low complement levels on routine blood work, can be identified and monitored, not so that everyone watching this should assume the worst about their own body. Fear that isn't attached to a specific, actionable next step doesn't protect you. Fear that turns into "I'll mention this at my next visit" does. Here is what changes when you take everything we've just walked through and act on it, even in small ways. You cannot undo however many months or years you've already spent without an explanation. But you can shorten the distance between where you are now and getting real answers. Documentation is the single most powerful tool available to you, and it costs nothing. A simple daily note: how tired you were on a scale you choose yourself, whether your feet burned at night, whether dryness improved or worsened, whether you felt dizzy standing up. Turns a vague, hard to describe feeling into a pattern a specialist can actually act on. It doesn't need to be complicated. A few words in your phone's notes app each evening: tired 7/10, feet burned after 9 p.m., dizzy once standing up from the couch, done consistently for even 2 or 3 weeks, gives a doctor something a single memory-based description in an appointment simply cannot. Patterns are visible in a log in a way they are never visible in a single conversation, because you're not asking your memory to reconstruct 3 months of symptoms in real time while also feeling nervous in a doctor's office. When you're ready to bring this to a doctor, specific language helps. Something like, "These symptoms are showing up together and affecting my ability to function day to day. Could we discuss whether a systemic or autoimmune cause, including Sjogren's, should be part of the evaluation?" That sentence does something important. It names the pattern without demanding a specific test or diagnosis, and it puts the decision where it belongs, in a conversation between you and a qualified clinician. Recognition doesn't cure anything by itself. But it does support better communication, it supports earlier evaluation, and it supports protecting the parts of your daily life: walking without pain, remembering the words you mean to say, having energy left over at the end of the day, that this disease can quietly take from you if it goes unnamed for years. So here's the pattern, laid out simply, in 3 groups. Worth documenting on your own, starting today: how tired you feel and whether rest actually helps, whether dryness is improving or worsening, brain fog and what seems to trigger it. Worth raising specifically at your next routine visit, even if it feels minor on its own: burning or tingling in your feet or hands, especially if it's symmetric and worse at night, dizziness when you stand up, joint pain that moves from place to place, digestive changes that don't have an obvious explanation. Worth raising promptly, not waiting for your next scheduled appointment: a cough that has lasted weeks without improving, or new, persistent swelling near your jaw or neck. And separate from all of that, requiring emergency care immediately rather than documentation of any kind: sudden severe weakness, sudden vision loss, difficulty breathing, chest pain, or any symptoms that could suggest a stroke or a severe allergic reaction. Those are not wait and see how you feel tomorrow symptoms, under any circumstances. What remains genuinely uncertain, and deserves to be said honestly, is how much any one person's mitochondrial involvement, nerve involvement, or organ involvement will progress. The research we've walked through tonight describes patterns and mechanisms observed across groups of patients. It cannot tell you, individually, what your own path looks like. That uncertainty isn't a weakness in the science. It's exactly why individualized medical evaluation, built on the pattern you now know how to document, matters more than any general video ever could. You came into this not knowing why your body felt like it was running on empty, day after day, no matter how much you slept. You're leaving with a real, research-based reason that fatigue in Sjogren's may not be about willpower or mindset at all, but about how efficiently your cells can produce the energy your body needs, and with a concrete way to start documenting your own pattern this week, so the next conversation you have about it starts from evidence instead of starting over. There's still one major piece we haven't covered: what the actual testing process looks like, which tests catch what, and why so many people get a false sense of reassurance from a single normal result. That's exactly what we are breaking down next.